Okay, so we're back. Now, we're going to talk about how the user interface was implemented, and so that's what we're going to do now. You're looking at the scripting editor for Unity 3D, and this is where you write the code and scripts and so forth. The code is written in C#, so it's very similar to Java if you're somebody that knows Java. Right? So the first thing we'll do is that each scene has its own main script, and all the components on the scene use their own individual scripts. And I do this because it keeps things encapsulated, and that way if I make a modification to a certain feature on a particular button, I can just go to the button, make the change, and then everything else doesn't get touched. So the encapsulation works well. And all of the scripts communicate with the main script for that particular view. Okay? Now, so here's the home script. There's the home controller, C home controller. And that's the very first one that's called when you first start the game, because that's the home screen, that's the first screen. You'll notice that this particular control class derives from C common constants instead of mono behavior, which is what normal Unity things do. If we go to common constants, you'll see that this is a class that holds constants that I use. Enumerated types, constants is either the item set, is it selected, is it not selected, what the left gyro what the left gyro trigger is, right, up and so forth. And so this is where I put my constants. And that's how everything has access to the constants. Okay? So let's get back to the home controller script. And you'll see that at start, the first thing we do is that we come in and we load the player preferences, because we need to have default values, or when we make modifications to the configuration, we need to be able to save those so that they're available the next time the person loads the game. So the way to do that is through the player preferences. Now, in Unity 3D, when you load scenes, so when you go from one scene to another, all the information that was in the previous scene is erased, it's gone. So in order to transfer information between scenes, the easiest way to do it is to use the player preferences, because the player preferences is global throughout all the scenes. And there's also persistence where it gets saved in a file so you can call it back. So what would you use this for? You could use this for, these are the settings that I had to remember these settings each time, so I don't have to redo them every time I load the game. Also to keep track of the highest score, you could use the player preference to say, I was on level 5. So when it checks it, it says you were playing level 5. Do you want to continue level 5 or do you want to start a new game? Type of questions like that. All right? So the first thing we do is that we come in and we get the file and we check to see if the customize has been set to 1010. What that means is that the very first time you run this program, the player preferences file doesn't exist. So I have to initialize the system with default values. And then once I define the default values, I want to store them into a player preferences file. And I want to make sure that I know that this isn't the first time that I'm loading the program. So by setting the customized info to 1010, that tells me that this is not the first time, so that I won't try to initialize the values. I'll use the values that are in the file. And that's why it works this way. Now you'll see there's a little commented section above that looks exactly like what's in the player preferences. The reason why I do this is that if I make changes during development, I need to update that file or else nothing will work right. So I force all the initial conditions back again by removing the comments, and then this code will be executed, and then customize will be saved, and then for that particular time, now everything's been up to date. It has all the new parameters in it, new values, and now the system will work properly. And then what I do is next time I compile it, I comment it out so it's not used anymore, and I just continue. So that's why you see that. All right, so that's the reporting about the player preferences. Now we're only going to talk about the configuration, the additional user interface that was added to the Space Patrol game, which is the configuration. Everything else, if you want to know about everything else about the Space Patrol game, then you'll have to watch the videos that I created for the development of the Space Patrol games, and that'll give you all that information. But right now, we're only concerned with the configuration information. So on the home screen, you'll see that there's the setup method, and what the setup method does is that it comes in, checks to see if the buttons are disabled. And I do this so that the person doesn't keep on pressing the button, and we keep on launching this code. Plays an audio clip. That audio clip is the sound of a click. So that's audio feedback to the user saying that he had pressed the button. Then I set the title to setup, which is telling him what it is that I'm going to be going to. Then I set the disable button to true. That's how this works, so he doesn't continuously press it. And then I load the settings level. When I load the settings level, there's no need for me to reset this value because everything in the home scene is going to be gone once the settings scene loads. Okay. So let's go to the settings scene controller panel. All right, so here's the settings scene. Now, you'll see that it has it's pretty lightweight. There isn't much there, but what you'll see is that the settings screen was like a menu. So there's a hazards mode, and what it does is that it plays the audio clip, it displays a message saying loading hazards, and then it loads the hazards scene. If it's the controls, it does the same thing. Puts controls up and loads the controls scene, and when it's the camera, it loads the camera scene and so forth. And when you're done, it returns you to the home scene. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward and easy. That's what the settings main control screen does. Now, on the setup mode button, so what happens is that the script that this is the setup button. So what we want is we have, let's look at the hazard. There's a script for each one of them. So you'll have the hazard mode button. This is the button that gives you the hazard. Then there's also one for control, and there's also one for camera, and there's also one for done. Now you'll see that the format is comes in and it calls this method the start coroutine concept. The way I've set things up is that each scene has its own main script, and each of the components on the scene have its own script, and this is because I wanted to encapsulate the operation of things so that if I have to make modifications to any particular item, I don't end up rippling everything and having problems. So if I just do it all in the main script, then the main script just grows and grows, becomes unmanageable, and I can cause all kinds of problems with copy and paste and control and things and so forth. So it gives it better portability, gives it isolation, gives it encapsulation, and it becomes more cohesive because each script only pertains to that particular operation, not all the operations. So in order to do that, I have to run this initialization, which what you see here is it's calling the settings controller, and it wants to make sure the settings controller loads. Again, I'm doing this because items in Unity 3D, when they load the scene, everything comes up asynchronously. So things are coming up, but they don't come up at the same time. And you really can't continue until you know you have all the information, the scene is completely loaded, because if you try to continue, if you don't do this check and you just go through pass once, the stuff isn't loaded, you'll have null objects and you'll get exceptions and things won't work right. So that's what this is doing. Because I have to sit in a loop, I need to make it a coroutine, which coroutine allows concurrent operations of things, because I want other methods, I want other events, I want other things to execute while I'm blocked, waiting to check again to see if the item is set. And the reason why I do the block, because if you don't do the block, you end up doing what they call the thread spins. And when the thread spins, it starves all the other threads, and nothing ever gets done, even though it's a code routine. So this will check it, wait a tenth of a second, check it again, wait a tenth of a second, check it again. During that sleep, for the tenth of a second, other things are happening in the system, and everything works nicely. So once that's done, I set the done, I fall through, and now I'm ready. Here we're using on mouse up and on touch ended. So that means that the event actually only happens when the person lifts their finger up from the pad. So if a person goes over and touches the pad, and if they never lift their finger, you will never hear the click, you will never have the event, nothing will happen. As soon as they take their finger off, then what that does is that causes the touch-ended event to fire. That calls the hazards mode routine in the settings controller, and now it loads the hazards screen. And that's pretty much how that works. Okay. The controller option, the controller mode button works the same way. The only difference is that it loads the controller screen instead of loading any one of these other screens. The same thing with the camera. Okay, so let's go to the hazards control screen. Here's the hazards control screen. As you can see, it's pretty lightweight because it really doesn't do anything here. Most of the operations have been encapsulated on each of the checkboxes. So because each one of the checkboxes can't exist at the same time, it was easy to create a script that the three of them each use, and there are three parameters inside that script that make it that customize it to that particular button. So we'll look at the hazards checkbox script. You'll see that this follows the same format where you'll see that up top it has the hazard preference. In this case, if the button we're talking about is large asteroid, this would be, the type would be large asteroid, would be entered in the properties box at development time. And the tag in this case is called large_asteroid, so that would be the string that would be put in that property location. And the hazard tag is large_asteroid. And that information will be put there. And then this checkbox is where the X needs to go. So, so once I give all that information to the script, now the script has been customized to that button and it's encapsulated. So, so that's what that happens. So the first thing it does on startup is that it comes in and it checks the player preferences to see what it was, to see if this particular option was selected. And in this case, let's say it's the large asteroids, it's checking to see if large asteroids has been checked. If it has been selected, then it puts a check in the checkbox and then runs the initialization operation. And in this case, because it's lightweight, the reason why it's here, even though we're not using it, I'm just trying to be consistent between all of the scripts. But I may, at some point later on, put code in this script, so I'm going to need it. So I'm trying to be consistent, and that's why I've done it this way. This particular one uses mouse down and on touch began. So that means that the event occurs when I put my finger down on the pad, the event occurs. And that calls this routine called process request. And process request comes in, and this is a toggle operation. So if the item has been checked, so it looks at the player preference and says, has this item been selected? And if it has been selected, then I will toggle it back to unselected, and then I'll save that value. And if it isn't selected, then I will toggle it to selected and save the value as selected. I will save the player preferences, and then I will call the audio play thing that says the button has been clicked. Okay. So right now, the audio clip is attached to the hazards controller, and because that's where the audio clip is, that's where you have to execute the command audio play. And the reason why I didn't put it on each button is because it just is additional overhead that's unnecessary in this particular case. All right? So you see here that the hazard label is what I use as the string to pick up asteroids. Remember I said we use the property and we customize the script for each individual button. So in this case, this would have said, this would have had in it large asteroids, if it was for the large asteroids. If it was for the small asteroids, it would have been small asteroids. If it was an alien ship, it would have been alien ship. Okay? So that's it for the hazards. All right? So now let's go to the controller, the controls controller. And as you can see, that's pretty lightweight as well. Right? And again, this is there for consistency. And then we go to the controls checkbox. Now, the controls checkbox is a little different because you have a choice of either touch buttons or the accelerometer motion. Now, in this case, they both can't exist. So I have to have a way of knowing that if I select one, the other one gets deselected. And because this is using the same concept as the hazards, where it's each individual button with its own customized script, I have to have something monitoring the whole process that says, that every half a second, it looks at it and says, is this value selected? If it is, then I've got to deselect the other one. Okay? So the startup comes in, it looks at the preferences, it says, what should these values be, it sets them accordingly, initialization, and it's there. Now this update display routine, same idea, coroutine, this is happening in the background, and it's on the main control script. And what it does is that it goes in and it checks the player preferences, like I said, and says, is it set? If it is set, then I've got to go to the other one and deselect the other one. Because only it can be one or the other, you can't have them both. And that's what this routine does. Mouse down, same thing, and here is what it does is it sets the value based on the customized information, saves the player preferences, sets the box, and then calls the audio. All right? So that's it with the controls. Now, what we'll do is, in a moment, we'll talk about the camera, and then we'll talk about how the accelerometers work, how the touch buttons work, and why we did what we did.